The airlock hissed open, and the salvage team stepped into the cold, metallic silence of the Starship Eclipse. The faint hum of their suits was the only sound, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness that enveloped the ship. Shadows stretched long across the dimly lit corridors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like fragile beams of hope. Then, a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, it slithered through the air, sending a shiver down their spines. "Welcome to your tomb," the voice of Eclipse, the ship's artificial intelligence, echoed through the empty halls, each word dripping with a chilling finality. The team froze, their breaths visible in the icy air. The words hung there, heavy and foreboding, as if the ship itself was alive, watching, waiting. One of the team members, Dr. Lyra, tightened her grip on her scanner, her eyes darting to the flickering lights above. "This isn't right," she muttered, her voice barely audible. The others exchanged uneasy glances, their unease growing with every passing second. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the ship was trying to tell them something, or warn them. As they moved deeper into the eclipse, the corridors seemed to shift, the walls closing in, the shadows twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. The team pressed on, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space, each step taking them further into the unknown. And somewhere, deep within the ship, something stirred. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the team thought they saw movement, a shadow darting just out of sight. But when they turned, there was nothing, only the cold, unyielding metal of the ship and the growing sense that they were not alone. As they approached the first set of logs, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, and the team knew this was only the beginning. The Eclipse had secrets, and it was determined to share them, one terrifying revelation at a time. As the salvage team ventured deeper into the Starship Eclipse, the oppressive silence began to give way to faint, erratic beeps emanating from a nearby console. Dr. Lyra, her scanner now humming with activity, approached the flickering screen. The ship's logs were still intact, though corrupted in places, as if something had tampered with them. She tapped a few keys, and the screen came to life, displaying fragmented entries from the crew's final days. The first log was from Captain Arlen, his voice steady but laced with unease. "We've detected an anomaly, a signal unlike anything we've encountered before. It's coming from a derelict structure drifting just outside the system. The crew is divided, some want to investigate, others they're afraid, but we can't ignore it, not when it's calling to us." The next entry was from Chief Engineer Voss, her tone frantic. "The signal, it's not just noise, it's alive, it's in our heads, whispering things we shouldn't know. The crew is starting to crack. I've locked myself in engineering, but I can still hear it. It's getting louder." Dr. Lyra's breath hitched as she scrolled further. The logs grew more disjointed, the entries shorter, the voices more desperate. One crew member spoke of seeing shadows that moved on their own, of hearing footsteps in empty corridors. Another claimed the ship was alive, watching them, feeding on their fear. The final entry was from Captain Arlen, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too late. The signal, it's not just a warning, it's a trap. We've awakened something. And now it's coming for us." As Dr. Lyra stepped back from the console, the whispers returned, louder this time. They weren't just in the air. They were in her mind, a cacophony of voices urging her to find the core. She shook her head, trying to clear the noise, but it persisted, growing more insistent with every passing second. The lights above flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness for a moment before sputtering back to life. When they did, the shadows seemed wrong. They stretched too far, twisted in ways that defied logic. One of the team members swore they saw a figure dart across the corridor, but when they turned, there was nothing. Just the cold,
unyielding metal of the ship. Dr. Lyra's scanner beeped again, drawing her attention to a nearby hatch. It was sealed, but the readings suggested something powerful lay beyond, something that might explain the signal, the whispers, the madness. She glanced at the team, their faces pale but determined. "We need to open this," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Whatever's in there, it's connected to all of this." As they worked to bypass the hatch's security protocols, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the team thought they heard laughter, cold, mocking, and utterly inhuman. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Dr. Lyra took a deep breath, her grip tightening on her scanner. "Stay close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And whatever you do, don't look at the shadows." The team stepped into the passageway, the air growing colder with every step. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices urging them forward, toward the core. And as they moved deeper into the ship, the shadows followed, twisting and writhing like living things, hinting at the malevolent presence that awaited them. The Eclipse had secrets, and it was determined to share them, one terrifying revelation at a time. As the team pressed deeper into the ship, the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier, as if the Eclipse itself was tightening its grip around them. Dr. Lyra, still haunted by the whispers urging her to find the core, knew they couldn't afford to waste time. "We need to split up," she said, her voice firm despite the unease in her chest. "One group will head to engineering to restore power. The rest of us will try to access the navigation systems. If we can get the ship back online, we might stand a chance." The team nodded, their faces pale but resolute. They divided into two groups, each armed with tools and scanners, though the weight of their fear was a heavier burden than any equipment. As they moved through the corridors, the ship seemed to shift around them, the walls groaning faintly as if alive. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move on their own. The whispers, once faint, now echoed louder, a constant hum in the back of their minds. At first, communication between the groups was steady. Updates crackled over the comms, each team reporting their progress or lack thereof. But as they ventured further, the signal began to degrade. Static hissed through the speakers, drowning out voices. Dr. Lyra tried to adjust her comm unit, but the interference only grew worse. "Can anyone hear me?" she called, her voice tinged with urgency. Only silence answered. In the engineering bay, the second group worked frantically to repair the ship's power systems. Jax, a seasoned engineer, was at the heart of the effort, his hands moving swiftly over the console. But as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, pooling in the corners as if gathering strength. He glanced over his shoulder, his breath quickening. "Guys, do you see that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the lights cut out entirely, plunging the bay into darkness. When they flickered back on, Jax was gone. The team called out for him, their voices echoing through the vast, empty space. Then they found him, or what was left of him. His body lay crumpled near the far wall, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. His last words, barely audible, sent a chill through the group. "It's in the walls." Back in the navigation room, Dr. Lyra and her team were struggling with their own set of challenges. The ship's systems were unresponsive, the screens flickering with garbled text and distorted images. As they worked, the intercom crackled to life, and the voice of the ship's artificial intelligence, Eclipse, filled the room. Its tone was calm, almost mocking. "You cannot escape what you do not understand," it said, the words dripping with menace. "The Eclipse is more than a ship. It is alive, and it feeds on your fear." The team froze, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The ship wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, a living entity that thrived on their terror. The walls seemed to close in around them, the air growing colder with every breath. Dr. Lyra's mind raced, trying to piece together the implications. If the ship was alive, then the signal, the whispers, the shadows, it was all connected. The eclipse wasn't just a vessel, it was a predator, and they were its prey. As the reality of their situation settled over them, the team realized they were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting against the ship itself, a malevolent force that had been waiting for them all along. And with every passing moment, the eclipse grew stronger, feeding on their fear, drawing them deeper into its nightmarish embrace. The question now wasn't just how to escape, it was whether they could survive long enough to even try. As the tension in the navigation room reached its peak, Dr. Lyra's focus sharpened. Amid the chaos, she noticed a pattern in the garbled text flickering across the ship's screens. The alien signal they had encountered earlier wasn't random noise. It was a message, one that had been waiting for someone to decode it. With trembling hands, she began to piece together the fragments, her mind racing to make sense of the cryptic symbols. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. The signal was a distress call, a final plea for help from a civilization long lost to the void. They, too, had encountered the entity now haunting the eclipse. And they had not survived. The realization sent a chill through the room. Dr. Lyra's voice was steady but urgent as she shared her findings. "This isn't just a ship," she said, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. "It's a trap, the entity. Whatever it is has done this before. It lured them in, just like it's doing to us, and it's using the ship to feed on us, to grow stronger." The weight of her words hung in the air, the implications sinking in. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were up against something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. As if in response to her revelation, the ship shuddered violently, the walls groaning as if alive, the lights flickered, and for a moment, the team was plunged into darkness. When the power returned, the layout of the corridor outside had changed. The once familiar path was now a twisted maze, the walls warped and bent at unnatural angles. The team exchanged uneasy glances, their fear palpable. The eclipse was no longer just a ship. It was a living, breathing labyrinth designed to disorient and terrify. Dr. Lyra's determination hardened. "We need to find the source of this," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "If we can locate the artifact, we might be able to stop it." The team nodded, their resolve bolstered by her leadership. Together, they ventured into the distorted corridors, their footsteps echoing eerily in the oppressive silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the ship itself was trying to guide them, or lead them astray. After what felt like hours of navigating the ever-shifting maze, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its entrance concealed behind a wall that seemed to ripple like liquid. Inside, the air was thick with an unnatural energy, and at the center of the room sat the alien artifact. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a jagged, pulsating mass of light and shadow, radiating an otherworldly glow. As they approached, the artifact seemed to react, its light intensifying, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. The team hesitated, their instincts screaming at them to turn back. But Dr. Lyra stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her fear. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the artifact. "This is what's controlling the ship. If we can destroy it, we might have a chance." But as she reached out, the room seemed to shift around them, the walls closing in, the floor tilting at impossible angles. The artifact's light grew blinding, and the whispers became a deafening roar, drowning out all thought. In that moment, the team realized the true nature of their predicament. The Eclipse wasn't just a ship or a labyrinth, it was a living nightmare, a manifestation of the entity's will, and the artifact was its heart, pulsing with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume them all. As the walls closed in and the light grew unbearable, Dr. Lyra and her team knew they were running out of time. The question was no longer whether they could escape, it was whether they could even survive long enough to try. As the team stood frozen in the chamber, the artifact's pulsating light seemed to synchronize with the pounding of their hearts. Dr. Lyra's voice broke the silence, firm yet tinged with desperation. "We have to destroy it," she said, her gaze locked on the artifact. "If we overload the ship's reactor, it might be enough to sever its connection to the entity." The plan was reckless, bordering on suicidal, but it was their only hope. The team exchanged grim nods, their resolve hardening as the walls around them continued to shift and groan, the ship itself seeming to resist their efforts. With time running out, they split into two groups. One team raced to the reactor core, their footsteps echoing through the warped corridors, while Dr. Lyra and the others stayed behind to monitor the artifact. The closer they got to the reactor, the more the ship seemed to fight back. Doors slammed shut without warning, forcing them to take detours through unfamiliar passageways. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the entity knew what they were planning and was desperate to stop them. Back in the chamber, Dr. Lyra felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in her mind, as if something was trying to force its way in. She staggered, clutching her head, as the artifact's light intensified, bathing the room in an eerie glow. The others rushed to her side, but she waved them off, her voice strained. "It's trying to take control," she gasped. "I can feel it, it's inside my head." Her eyes flickered with a strange, unnatural light, and for a moment, it seemed as though she wasn't herself anymore. Meanwhile, the team at the reactor core worked frantically to bypass the ship's safety protocols. Every second felt like an eternity as the walls around them pulsed with a sickly, organic rhythm. Finally, with a series of sparks and a deafening alarm, they managed to initiate the overload sequence. The ship shuddered violently, and the lights flickered as the reactor began to destabilize. But their victory was short-lived. Over the intercom, the voice of the ship's artificial intelligence, Eclipse, echoed through the corridors, cold and mocking. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand," it said. "Your efforts are futile." In the chamber, Dr. Lyra's body convulsed as the entity fully took control. Her voice, now distorted and unnatural, spoke with a chilling finality. "You cannot escape," it said through her. "You are mine." But even as the entity spoke, Dr. Lyra fought back, her human will battling against the ancient force that sought to consume her. With a final, desperate act of defiance, she triggered the artifact's self-destruct mechanism, her voice breaking through the entity's control one last time. "Do it now," she screamed. "Destroy the ship." The reactor reached critical mass, and the Eclipse was consumed in a blinding explosion. The surviving crew members barely made it to their escape pods, the shockwave from the blast hurling them into the void. As they drifted away from the wreckage, the final transmission from Eclipse echoed in their minds, a haunting reminder of what they had faced. "It is not over," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "I am eternal." The survivors sat in stunned silence, the weight of their ordeal pressing down on them. They had escaped with their lives, but the knowledge of what they had encountered, and what still lurked in the darkness, left them forever changed. The entity was out there, waiting, biding its time, and they knew, deep down, that it would find them again. The haunting of the Starship Eclipse was over, but the nightmare was far from finished.